looks like back from that breath belt measurement. So you get these very, very rapid movements. And that's what gives you the ha, ha, ha sounds. Very, very rapid contractions. And when those contractions run together, you get those sort of spasms of This is somebody actually standing up and laughing. And those big peaks are them starting to collapse because you start to lose muscle strength, muscle tone in the upper body. So it's a very, very simple way of making a sound. You've just got this direct translation. You could be stamping on someone's chest and having the same effect. But we can look at examples, again, of people starting to lose control when they're laughing and get some insight into what's starting to happen. So this next example, again, is of some people talking on the radio. It is a cricket broadcast. One of them tells a terrible joke. Immediately, the pitch of their voices are affected. Even before they start laughing, see the pitch go up.
And just flicked a bail with his right.
He more or less tried to do the splits over it, and unfortunately, the inner part of his thigh must have just removed the bail.
He just didn't quite get his leg over.
Anyway,
terrible joke.
He did very well
pitch has
indeed,
gone up.
batting 131 minutes and hit 3 fours. And then we had Lewis playing extremely well.
The other man's now laughing.
He's 47 not out. Aggers, do stop it. And he was joined by De Freitas, who was in for 40 minutes, a useful little partnership there. They put on 35 in 40 minutes, and then he was caught by Dujean Walsh.
Now, at this point, Brian Johnson takes a breath in and starts to talk again, and now the laughter gets him. If you look at where the pitch of his voice starts to go, he's an adult male, he has a low-pitched voice, his pitch goes very high. He even makes whistling sounds, he's producing such pressures.
Lawrence, always entertaining, batting for 35. 35 minutes, hit a 4 over the wicketkeepers. Aggers, for goodness sake, stop it.
Jonathan Agnew tries to speak.
Yes, Lawrence.
Completely fails. Big swing and a miss.
He hit a 4 over the wicketkeeper's head, and he was out for the night. Tough kick. Batted 12 minutes, and then was caught by Haynes or Patson for 2, and there were 54 extras, and hit them all out for 419. I've stopped laughing now.
Now, again, what I like about this is that they got in trouble for this. They're not supposed to. BBC does not like commentators to lose emotional control of their voices. They're not supposed to get excited when somebody wins. They don't like people starting laughing. They got in trouble for this happening. They don't want to laugh. They still can't stop it. And there's a couple of things I really like about this. So the fact that immediately, as soon as there's laughter around, the pitch starts to go up, his voice is immediately affected. And then you sort of see this natural evolution of the laughter taking over, because once he's started, he actually can't stop. And I'll give you the big heads up, we don't know why that is, where you can be overwhelmed by laughter in this way. It's stopping him breathing, it's stopping him speaking, it's trying to kill him. That is the sort of the end point of this, because you just breathe out when you're laughing, you don't breathe in. And he's producing pitches he could never do under voluntary control. You can hear the height of the pitch he's going to. And then, as you see, as he gets back in control, you can actually see the pitch of his voice coming down as he manages to get back on top of the laughter. The other thing that's quite striking about this is almost immediately they're not laughing because of the joke. It's a terrible joke, it's not very funny, but almost immediately they're laughing just because they're both laughing. I can play this to undergraduates and edit out the joke and people will still laugh because it's contagious. It's a behaviourally contagious phenomenon. You can catch it from each other. You don't need to know why somebody is laughing to find yourself joining in with it.
It does Santa drink. So first of all, does he drink? I think we can all safely say he does. Since he was first mentioned in a Christmas or a carol in the 15th century, his line in that carol was "Make good cheer and be right merry," and he was carousing and getting everybody to be drinking along with him. And then, so he's been drinking for a long time, and then in the 17th century, drinking became a bit unpopular, and maybe Father Christmas went into remission and stopped drinking, more set on delivering presents to children. But I think that was just a ruse to get into people's houses and get his hands on lots of booze. So I can safely say Santa does drink. Now, does he have a drink problem? Well, I would say yes, he probably does. He has the hallmarks of an addict, of an alcoholic. He has this known drinking history. He's got the stereotypical look of an alcoholic with his rosy, big red nose and his rosy red cheeks. And if you think about alcoholics, Cloninger back in the 1980s described the subtypes of alcoholics. And I think Father Christmas, I would postulate he falls well and truly into the type 2 alcoholic. So these alcoholics are mainly male. Yep, that's tick that box. Early onset, like I say, he's been drinking since the 15th century. So I guess he was quite young then, so I think he started drinking early. A family history, if you actually look at the history of where Father Christmas came from, one of his predecessors, Odin, the Norse god, was also quite a heavy drinker, so he's got the family history. Antisocial. Well, he lives by himself up in the North Pole. The Raymond Briggs Father Christmas is known to be pretty miserable, and I'd say anyone who breaks into all those houses on Christmas Eve must be pretty antisocial. So, yep, he's got that. And then high in novelty seeking. Okay, he goes around on a sleigh pulled by 12 reindeers. That's pretty novelty seeking. So, yes, I would say Father Christmas is an alcoholic. But why does he drink? Individual vulnerability. Why is it that lots of people drink? We're all happy to go and have a drink, and I'm sure we will be at the reception after this. But some of us show resilience. It's just a social drink. We go home, don't drink anymore. Others become addicted to alcohol and have this ongoing problem. What is it that makes Santa Claus unable to give up the booze, whereas these other people in the pub or other people in the situations can have a drink and then leave it alone? Why are some people resilient, whereas others become addicted? And that can be down, one of the factors that may go into play is people's genetic predisposition. And there is accumulating evidence, and I'm going to be focusing on the GABA-A receptor system. There is accumulating evidence of a gene association with one of these genes, the GABA2 gene, with alcoholism. And this is perhaps one of the strongest genetic links between a gene variation and alcoholism that's been found to date. But interestingly, this gene association isn't just with alcoholism, but it's with other drugs of abuse as well. And so it's been linked to marijuana, nicotine, and also I'll show you some data on cocaine addiction, because I would like to suggest that Father Christmas isn't just a drinker, but he also has a predilection for the white stuff too.
The war on some drugs, where we are at the moment in our highly advanced society. Santa is far more likely to be on prescription drugs than anything else, to be completely honest. And we've seen a massive rise in the over-prescribing of drugs. This cocktail is what I deal with on a daily basis with my addiction patients, and they're worse than any of the things that they're taking on the street, to be honest. Real problems with the over-prescribing of all of these drugs. So Santa, if he's like anyone else in the Western world, will almost certainly be on one or two of these, if not 3 or 4. Something for the elves, maybe. This is a picture of the largest collection of elf impersonators ever, apparently. It was a world record. There's been a lot of interest in cognitive enhancers over the years. We know that coffee is a cognitive enhancer. We know that nicotine is a cognitive enhancer. Methylphenidate, obviously. Modafinil is used by medical students nowadays, I hear. Which is far more sophisticated than in my day. LSD, I'm involved in a LSD study in the new year, giving microdoses of LSD to elderly patients in the 5 to 20 microgram range, a sub-psychedelic dose, with the idea that this improves their cognitive abilities. So we're going to be giving them very low doses of LSD, and they're going to be playing chess and carrying out various cognitive tests of creativity as well. So that could be the next big thing. So cognitive enhancement for the elves, I think, is going to be a good idea to make them work harder. I don't know if Santa is aware of all the psychedelic research that's going on today, but it's a really fascinating area to be involved in. So any aspiring neuroscientists in the room, whether clinical or at the study level of neuroscience, I could not recommend more highly a career working with psychedelic drugs. They are the most fascinating tool for our advancement in neuroscience. They've been woefully neglected for the last 40 years, but they are now back on the research table in a big, big way. And it's a really fascinating area of research. Do get involved. Some of the psychedelic research that is going on at the moment, we've had studies that all started in '96 with a DMT physiology study, dose-response study, and since then we've seen psilocybin to look at OCD. A lot of work around psilocybin and the spiritual experience going on at Johns Hopkins. MDMA for PTSD is a particular favourite of mine because we're doing this neuroimaging study in Cardiff, giving MDMA versus placebo to patients with treatment-resistant PTSD, putting them in an fMRI scanner and traumatizing them slightly. With the hypothesis that under MDMA they'll have a reduced fear response and a greater prefrontal cortex response to develop this drug as a treatment for PTSD. We have a lot of neuroimaging mechanism studies that have been done here at Imperial and in Bristol. Some really fascinating work's been done with LSD recently. Really getting to the nut of what is consciousness and where is the seat of the human soul within the anatomy of the brain. We'd be crazy to disregard our psychedelics as tools for that kind of research. And of course, addiction. Psychedelics have a very close relationship with the treatment of addiction since the 50s, and that's another big area to look at.
Almost all processes within our body are controlled by what time of the day it is, and this includes very fundamental processes such as blood pressure and body temperature, all the way to high-level processes where several regions of the brain needs to come together, like cognitive alertness, right? What you may or may not realize is all of this are under the circadian clock. Let me just highlight this with two specific examples. So what you see here is a study done in Sweden, comparing odds ratio of having a serious accident against time. As you can see, there is a massive peak around 4 a.m. This goes against the common sense. Common sense would suggest you're far more likely to die out of a car accident where everybody else drives, which is between 8 and 8. But that's not the case. And this coincides with the point where I showed you previously, where your cognitive alertness is at the lowest point, right? And the case is not very different if you look at something like cardiac ischemia. So if you see here, what you notice is around 6 a.m., just about the time when you wake up, there's a massive spike there, which coincides with the time where your blood pressure rises. So so far what we've established is clock disruption is quite disruptive, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words, and you can see here. And what's the difference between two mice is that this mouse has a broken clock. So he's got a mutation in one of his circadian genes, as a result of which he's not only obese, he's also diabetic, he's got high blood pressure, and he's got several neuropsychiatric phenotypes to talk about. And you don't need to carry this mutation in order to have these deficiencies. In fact, just putting you functioning out of sync with your clock, this can happen. For example, feeding two wild-type mice. If you take two wild-type mice and feed one of them high-fat diet at a time when its body is not expecting it, or out of sync with its clock, you can make the same thing happen. And you can correct this just by correcting the circadian clock. Right? So it's great that we can develop drugs to correct various metabolic disorders and several neuropsychiatric disorders in theory. But more importantly, if Santa could fix his jet lag, he can go from this to this, right? So there is a solution.
Okay, well, modafinil is another one of these drugs, which I'll describe in a moment. So, of course, there is an issue. Santa's little helper, would Santa need such a drug? And I think there are plenty of reasons to suggest that he would need such a drug. Because consider the problem that Santa has flying in the sleigh above all of these chimney pots you see here. So they're dispersed spatially, so this is a spatial working memory task, and he has to remember which ones he's just delivered the presents to. So the task here, of course, is to choose red boxes and to find blue tokens, which are stacked up here. And the challenge is not to return to a red box which has previously had a blue token. In other words, a test of working memory. And obviously, Santa wouldn't want to return to a chimney to give 2 doses of presents to those lucky children. So he has to keep a clean head about it. And we found, in fact, a while ago, with Cambridge University undergraduates as volunteers, this is Rebecca Elliott, Barbara Sahakin and others, that Ritalin or methylphenidate actually does improve performance in this working memory task, at least when the task is novel. And Mittel Mehta, who's here, replicated those results in the context of a PET imaging study. This is the network that's activated by such a task, frontoparietal system, and Ritalin actually reduces blood flow in this system whilst improving performance, which is a very interesting result. It's instructive for all of those people who think that brain activation is necessarily good. It's interesting to interpret. Some would interpret this as some evidence of enhanced efficiency or enhanced signal-to-noise processing under the drug. But that would be an interpretation. Now, of course, another important centre task is the Stockings of Cambridge, because obviously Centre Stocking, he has to be able to manipulate the gifts in the precise sequence that the children will experience. And in this version of the so-called Tower of London task, the Stockings of Cambridge, the subject has to work out how to convert this array of coloured balls into this one in the minimum number of moves. And the answer is 5. So I'm not going to talk to you about that. But you have to essentially look at these arrays and pick out that number after you've manipulated this imagery in your head in spatial working memory to get the right answer. This is a task which, like working memory, depends on the frontal lobes, and in fact we showed a long time ago that selective damage to these sectors of the frontal lobe, dorsolateral and dorsal medial, impaired selectively performance in this task. This is with brain damaged subjects. And I suppose this might be relevant to Santa because after all these centuries of clambering down into chimneys and out again, there's the inevitable risk of head injury. And so this is another factor that we have to take into account. Now, like spatial working memory, Ritalin also produces a quite remarkable improvement in performance on this task, again, when the task is novel. And interestingly, when it's difficult, when the number of moves is quite high, 5 or 6, and this is like solving difficult chess problems. So Ritalin may be good in these particular circumstances. But we found in the same study that if the task was easier, planning task, and the subjects were familiar with it, they did worse under the same dose of Ritalin. As you see here, their percentage performance was worse on the second sessions. It's an easier version of the task. And interestingly, they tended to respond a bit quicker. So probably what's going on here is they're far too confident and they are responding impulsively because they think they know the right answer, but they're getting it wrong. So this is the bad side of Ritalin. It may make you overconfident and too impulsive. Well, I mentioned modafinil earlier, and of course, whereas we do understand how these drugs work quite well, Ritalin and atomoxetine, we have a very poor understanding of this drug, which, of course, has been licensed in the treatment of narcolepsy. It's called Provigil. And this is a list of some of the mechanisms by which modafinil has been assumed to work. It covers almost the entire neurotransmitter lexicon. It goes from indirect mediation of acetylcholine through histamine, adrenergic alpha-1 receptors, affects hypothalamic orexin, probably affecting sleep-wake cycles, as an effect on histamine, dopamine transporter activity, and even an effect on glutamate as an inverse agonist. So nobody really knows. But the interesting thing about modafinil, confounding pharmaceutical companies are still scratching their heads to how this drug actually works. It does produce quite remarkable effects, again in normal volunteers. So this is the data Danny Turner and Barbara Sahakin and I got on this task in healthy volunteers as a function of difficulty. And you can see that the improvement, this is in terms of solving problems as a function of difficulty, is greatly improved in the case of treatment with modafinil. These are the number of turns it takes to get it right. So in other words, the number of perfect solutions is enhanced by these doses of modafinil. And we've managed to repeat these results. Gained a lot of publicity, interesting. Scientists wake up to brain stimulant, and this whole issue about the use of cognitive enhancers in normal subjects. In a fairly recent replication, we also tested the drug on the spatial working memory task, and at difficult levels you can see again a significant improvement. But we found an additional result of interest here, which I think begins to explain how this drug is working at some kind of cognitive level. We simply asked the volunteers to rate how pleasurable it had been to do the task after their performance of it, either under placebo or modafinil. And as you can see, there's not that much enthusiasm for doing the Cantab tasks under placebo, but under modafinil there's huge pleasure expressed. 10 is the maximum. They really like doing these tasks. Even on those tests which aren't improved, they like. This is incredible. And this is incredible because modafinil is not a drug of abuse. It's repeatedly been shown it has zero abuse potential. It does not produce euphoria, but it does produce this presumably work-related pleasure. Now, isn't that a useful drug to have?
I think I'm going to stick with my Santa Claus, and I'll stick with Bailey's.
The dose?
A bottle. No. Yeah, I could publish double shot.
I think I'd probably give Santa psilocybin. It's a naturally occurring drug that grows in the autumn time throughout the world, so you can stock up on it before the Christmas rush. It will provide him with a sense of cosmic unity, so he can travel to all places in the universe simultaneously and spread love and peace to everyone he meets.
So I guess I would obviously have to say modafinil, but I'll be precise about the dose. I think the normal optimal dose for normal adults would be 200 milligrams. I think for Santa, probably about 400, given his greater bulk. And that should tide him through for 24 hours.
I was going to say that. About the modafinil for a couple of reasons. I can't think of a job that is more boring than dropping 6 billion, about a third of the kids need presents, so about 2 billion presents. And to do it without, not mess up the presents, which is a very tricky job, obviously. And it happens. So if you take modafinil, you don't even care. You just like it doing it. You don't care whether you screw it up. So I do modafinil, and the other reason is you don't have to take very much, probably, because the half-life is 16 to 18 hours. So taking 200 milligrams or 400 milligrams, like Trevor said, should last you for the day.
And night.
And a night. Yeah.
I fear that Christmas will be a little lonely this